So you're thinking about moving to Seattle, Washington, but before you do, you need to understand the map. The thing about Seattle that a lot of people underestimate is the geography. And what I mean by that is Seattle's broken up by water, we have bridges, and there's a lot of different features in the area that actually make a really big difference on your quality of life. And if you don't know how all of those things relate to each other as far as the day-to-day commute, traffic, getting around, and daily access, it can completely wreck your quality of life living here. So in this video today, I'm going to walk through the major areas of Seattle and the East Side, how everything's laid out. We'll walk through that together. And I'm also going to share the biggest mistake that I see people make that relocate to Seattle. And a lot of times could be the reason that they actually end up leaving the area. And if we haven't met yet, my name's Anthony Modica. I'm a realtor in the Seattle area, and I help people relocate to the greater Seattle area. If you have any questions at the end of this video, shoot me a text, give me a call. Happy to have a conversation with you. My entire goal is to make sure that you have everything that you need to make an informed decision about moving to the area or not. So let's get right into it. So the first thing is I want to actually give you a high level overview of the greater Seattle area and how it's actually made up and broken down. So first, we'll start with Seattle proper, and that's going to be your downtown area right over here. So you got your Space Needle, you've got your core downtown, you've got the stadiums for football and baseball here in South downtown. And this little body of water here is called Elliott Bay. That's where you see all the ferries going in and out in postcards and in the movies where you see Seattle show up. This is going to be your stereotypical downtown Seattle atmosphere. All right. And then just west of Sodo, you have West Seattle. So that's going to be this little section here. And West Seattle is interesting because there's really only one way in and out, and that's through a bridge called the West Seattle Bridge that connects to I-5 right over here, and you cross over the Port of Seattle, and then you're in West Seattle. So it's not an island, but it kind of feels like it because you cross the bridge, and the only way in and out aside from the West Seattle Bridge is taking long back roads over to the Highway 509 and looping back up to I-5, which most people are not going to do. So West Seattle is kind of its own little unique charm, and a lot of people like that area just because it feels a little bit more roomy as far as the neighborhood goes. It's got its own atmosphere, but it's still really close to Seattle proper. Zooming back out, we have what locals will call the East Side. So when somebody from here references the East Side, basically, that means the cluster of cities across from Lake Washington. So that's going to be the Kirkland area, Redmond. Bellevue's the big city of the East Side. That's usually the most well known. And then on the far east border, you have Sammamish and Issaquah. Mercer Island can also be considered part of the East Side as well. Now, I mentioned the water. Well, first off, we actually have a lot of it. Okay. So you have the Puget Sound, that's the major saltwater body of water to the west of Seattle. And then we have Lake Washington, which is right in the middle that separates Seattle and the East Side areas. And then further east, we have Lake Sammamish. And then let's also talk about how you actually get around the major freeways and highways in the greater Seattle area. So for your north and south commutes, the main corridors are going to be I-5, which runs directly through downtown Seattle. You can take that all the way north until you hit Canada and all the way down south till you hit Portland. On the east side, if you're living on the east side, 405 is going to be a big part of your commute potentially, and that runs north and south, and that connects to I-5 on the north end up near Linwood, and on the south end over here by the Renton-Tukwila area. And then between Seattle and the east side, that's connected by two floating bridges. You have I-90 on the south side, and so this is going to connect Bellevue, Mercer Island, and right into downtown, south downtown area. Quick fact, nobody from here says South Downtown Seattle. The term here is SoDo. So if you hear anyone say SoDo, they're talking about South Downtown Seattle, right where all the stadiums are, the football and baseball stadiums, and the industrial district by the port. Now, the other bridge is going to be Highway 520. So that's going to connect the north end of Seattle with the east side, specifically funneling into Bellevue. Now, 520, just so everybody knows, is a tolled bridge. It's tolled 24 hours a day. There's no off days or anything like that. There's off peak and peak tolling, so the cost does vary throughout the week, the hours. But something to be aware of if you're relocating to the area and you're going to have to be crossing the lake every day. Keep that in mind. If 520 is going to end up being your main commuting corridor, that's going to be an additional expense. It's a beautiful crossing, just like I-90. It's just going to cost you. So let's break the region down into the main areas and neighborhoods. So let's actually change this view here. Here we go. So let's start with Seattle proper. So Seattle proper is going to be this area right here. That's going to be your downtown core. Like I mentioned earlier, that's going to be where you'll find the Space Needle, all the tall buildings in Seattle that you can see from the east side, and SoDo, where the stadiums are. So this is going to be your urban core. So if you're really after that condensed high-rise city living, this might be the area for you. And then the surrounding neighborhoods directly around downtown, that's going to be areas like Capitol Hill, Queen Anne, Fremont, Magnolia, Ballard, the U District where University of Washington is, and Central District is another big area. So those are going to be right outside of downtown. You're depending on which area or neighborhood you're looking at anywhere from 10 to 20 minutes to get into downtown. So it still has that Seattle city access, but a lot more single family living compared to the downtown core. And then zooming out across Lake Washington, going back over to the east side, like I said, that's going to be your Bellevue, your Kirkland, your Redmond, your Mercer Island, and Sammamish and Issaquah down here. And a lot of relocating buyers that think they want to live in Seattle usually find that that isn't always the case. In a lot of instances, I've found that people really just want proximity and access to Seattle rather than living in Seattle itself. And so that's where the east side usually enters the conversation because it's a lot more suburban, newer development, and it's also a major job center, especially on the tech side with Microsoft being present over in Redmond. And a lot of the other tech companies also have offices in downtown Bellevue. So it's a big tech hub as well. And so if you're considering moving to the Seattle area, I would certainly recommend visiting both Seattle proper and the east side because they live completely different. That topic in itself could be a video all on its own. As well, the east side also tends to have a higher price point, and so it is definitely associated with luxury, upscale living, and the price points definitely reflect that in the real estate around there. And then moving north of Seattle into the suburbs, you're going to have Shoreline, Linwood, and Everett would be considered the north boundary of the greater Seattle area. And so those areas are really going to open up. They're going to be more suburban. Some cities like Linwood definitely have a lot to offer as well, but it really these areas really balance price point with access to Seattle because you can still hop on I-5 and get to Seattle relatively quickly if there's no traffic, but that is heavily dependent on the time of day and whether it's a weekday or a weekend. The further you get out from the city, the more that's going to be a consideration, and the more the traffic patterns are something that could really make an impact on your day to day. Now, if we flip to the opposite side and go south, it's going to be a similar story. On the southern border, you're going to have Renton, SeaTac, where the airport is, Kent, Auburn, Federal Way, and then Tacoma, which is the second biggest city in Washington. And that's going to be the south end of the greater Seattle area. It's also connected by I-5 as well. And so, really, one area is not necessarily better than the other. As I mentioned before, it's really based on the geography, and it's really going to come down to what your day-to-day commute might look like. Because for one person, if they're living in Seattle and working in Seattle, they're not really going to have much of a commute. If you're working in Seattle and you live on the east side, all of a sudden you've got to deal with the bridges, a lot more conversation around tolls, and then it becomes a question of, do you want to cross the lake every day? And so the water really plays a big role in what your quality of life might look like, because it creates those choke points with the traffic. So to summarize this section, the major areas to break down are Seattle proper, the east side, the north end, and then your south end. So once you start understanding those big zones, then it starts to make a lot more sense how the road system interconnects everything. So let's jump into that. So one big mistake that I see people make all the time when they move here is they pick an area based on a house that they liked, or they just like the atmosphere of a certain neighborhood, or it's the price point. They just pick it solely based on budget. And that is where a lot of people make the wrong call when moving here. The real questions that you need to ask is, am I going to have to cross the lake every day? Do I want to cross the lake every day? Am I going to have a reliance on a specific freeway corridor, whether that's I-5 or 405 or 520 or I-90? What's your reliance going to be like on that? Because if there's an accident one day and that's your only main route to and from work or to get home, then all of a sudden you have an hour 45-minute commute. And that's why understanding this map is so important, because the distances themselves can be very misleading, but 10 miles at the wrong time of day in the Seattle area could take you an hour and 40 minutes if it's at the wrong time, or if it's peak hours, or if there's an accident. And I've seen people move here, have to deal with that realization because they ended up in the wrong area and it just doesn't match their lifestyle or their commute habits, and they're gone in less than a year. They just can't put up with it. So it's a really big factor, and it's something that you actually have to spend time in the area. You have to visit the different areas and really get a feel for it, because looking at pictures online, looking at Google Maps, it can be very misleading. So how should you think about this if you're actually going to move here? Well, I'd recommend, if you want a more city feel, more density, more access and walkability, then Seattle might actually be a really good option, or one of the surrounding Seattle neighborhoods in North Seattle or South Seattle. If you want a more suburban feel, or you want newer developments or access to a lot of like luxury shopping and things of that nature, then the east side enters the conversation, and that could potentially be a really good fit as well. If your priority is just having more space or getting more square footage for your money, then expanding into the north end or the south end is going to be part of that conversation. And as you get further out from Seattle, the price points do tend to come down a bit, and it can make a big difference on what your money gets you. So $800,000 might not go far on the east side or in downtown Seattle, but it could get you something in the north end or the south end if you're willing to commute. All right, so the big mistake that I mentioned, I see people making at the beginning of this video, it's always choosing the house first and not prioritizing how that area actually lives, what the access looks like, and how that is going to affect them on a day-to-day basis once they're actually here and committed. So then later, once they're actually here and planted, then it hits them, oh, I'm having to cross the lake every single day. Oh, 520 is really my only real option to get to and from work, and that's tolled, and that's an additional expense. Or I'm relying on I-5 to commute north or south, and that's added 45 minutes to my commute, and I'm driving 3.5 hours a day round trip. So here's how to avoid that. Choose your area first, then choose the house. Because if you don't understand how the area is going to live for your particular situation, then finding a great house in that area will be completely mitigated by all of the factors that negatively impact your quality of life. So if you can get the area nailed down, then finding the house, that's a lot less stressful. In other words, get the geography down first, then you can fall in love with the properties in that area. So again, when you're moving to Seattle, understanding the area and the geography, that's half the battle. The other half is finding the house, but you have to do it in the right order. So if you are thinking about relocating to the Seattle area and need help narrowing down which area, neighborhood, region, or corridor will make the most sense for your situation, feel free to reach out, give me a call, shoot me a text. I am born and raised in this area. I love helping people find the perfect area for their specific situation, and I'm happy to have a conversation.